So welcome to this World Mental Health Day webinar. This webinar is addressing global mental health priorities in partnership with AWARE. So my name is Cara Munn. I'm the Esther Ireland Programme Coordinator with the Irish Global Health Network. So as I mentioned, we'd really love to know where you're joining us from. So if you would like to add into the chat box, we can see there where you're coming from. We already have quite a few people who have joined us. So thank you for coming along today. Before I begin, there's just a few points to be aware of. So this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available on the Irish Global Health Network website following the event. Live streaming is also available right now on our YouTube channel, Irish Global Health Network. And if you have any questions during the event, please use the questions and answers feature at the bottom of the screen. And we hopefully will be able to respond to some of those questions during the event. We encourage you to share messages from this event on Twitter and other social media platforms, and please tag us. So we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. We'll just allow a few more people to join. So far I can see we have 17 participants there, so we'll probably just wait a few moments and we'll have a few more. So for those of you just joining, you're very welcome to this World Mental Health Day webinar. And we will be kicking off very shortly. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Cara. This is the World Mental Health Day webinar addressing global mental health priorities. And I'm now going to hand you over to Ben Adams, who will moderate the panel discussion. So Ben, as you may know, is a board member of the IGHN. He currently works for the World Health Organization Mental Health and Substance Use Department, specifically supporting their special initiative for mental health. And Ben comes to us with a wealth of knowledge in this area. He comes from a mental health nursing background and has worked in many different roles as a clinician and as a mental health specialist globally. So I hand you over now to Ben. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cara, and welcome everyone. Before I start, happy World Mental Health Day, wherever you are. It's great to have you all here with us. On behalf of the Irish Global Health Network, I'm pleased to introduce our panel of three remarkable speakers. We have Dr. Susan Brannick, Clinical Director for AWARE. We have Michael Njenga, Regional Mental Health Advisor for Africa at CBM Global Disability Inclusion, and Julianne Cullen, Chairperson for the EU region for the Global Mental Health Peer Network. So you're all very welcome. Susan, maybe if we can start with you and from your vast experience, how does mental health evolve and change throughout different stages of a person's life, I suppose from childhood to older age?
Yeah, sure. It's a good place to start, and quite a vast area, I suppose, isn't it? So, and really mental health is like physical health is a part of life at all ages. You know, we know that babies and young children are developing in terms of social skills, cognitive development, psychological, emotional, all of those experiences are sort of building in early childhood, and I suppose contributing to positive mental health. So certainly what we, I guess maybe thinking about the most straightforward way to describe that, what we experience in the outside, the external world as young children, we tend to internalize parts of that or represent a map of that. So how we might learn how to talk to ourselves, how we might learn what to expect from the world, and how we interact with the world. Some of those patterns can be, or maybe templates can be laid down early. It doesn't mean to say that they can't change or you can't develop awareness of them over time, or that they're inherently negative or positive. It's just the fact that we're built that way. Our experiences can really shape us. I guess a key psychological theory maybe that many people will be aware of in terms of mental health for early years is that of attachment theory. So, you know, we're built for human connection, and certainly attachment is about a reliable and consistent caregiver as children that we can relate to, that provides, as I said, consistent and reliable care. And there's a lot of research to say that can be very relevant for mental health as we get older, but also if someone's listening to that and thinking, well, they didn't really have a huge amount of positive experiences. As I said, there's a lot of research to say that even one positive experience with a caregiver when we're younger can really make a big impact. So I guess there's kind of key parts of our social worlds that impact as we grow. And thinking about kind of the World Mental Health Day theme, I suppose that mental health is a key universal human right. I guess it's important to think that mental health isn't just something that stands alone inside of us, but we relate, don't we, to our culture, to our societies. Where we sit in society really matters. So certainly mental health is evolving through the ages in terms of young adulthood, and then as we develop into kind of our careers, longer term relationships throughout adulthood, and then maybe thinking into older adulthood as well. Sort of mental health is ongoing development, and growth is still ongoing. So there's quite a range of things happening. I guess we could probably talk about that all day as well.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting, and I loved hearing you speak there actually about kind of, you know, human connection being key through all stages of life. What then are some of the, I suppose, common mental health challenges that individuals face at different points in their life, and how can we better understand, I suppose, and address those challenges?
Yeah. I mean, I think the challenges can be really diverse and varied, again, depending on where you are in the world, where you are in society, maybe where you are in your family system or your social systems. And those challenges can be different. Just thinking about older age, maybe even nearly working backwards, some of the challenges there can be loneliness. Now, it's interesting, loneliness, people think that that's just something of older age. It's not, but it's strongly correlated and linked to mental health. But it can be a challenge that's more prominent in older age because mobility can be impacted. Places, people can be less accessible, so that can contribute to higher levels of loneliness and then to mental health. Certainly we know, like a kind of a systemic challenge that people in older age might face is the lack of maybe the limited offering of psychological therapy if someone presents with depression. So we know that older adults don't tend to get offered that, even though the outcomes are really good for that group. You know, if they're offered therapy, they tend to make use of it really well and do improve. So that can be a kind of a systemic challenge. Certainly maybe thinking about in younger age or working age adults, housing is another key thing that comes up. Obviously, there's huge issues here in the moment, isn't there, about housing? And that's a central aspect in terms of people's mental health too. And as we were talking about before, the kind of growing and evolving through life, there's certain milestones and tasks and transitions that we all go through. And some of those can be really impacted by our social environment. So if there's nowhere to live, or people are kind of in temporary accommodation, or adults living in family homes, that throws up a huge amount of challenge to be managed, and then can impact on mental health as well.
Thank you. And I suppose links to that then as well, and to those, you know, specific kind of challenges, from your perspective, you know, what is the, I suppose, importance of early intervention in promoting mental health and preventing mental health issues, specifically maybe in kind of, you know, younger generations?
I think it's really important, isn't it? And I guess and certainly the evidence has really moved to say that early intervention is key. A lot of services have restructured to highlight and promote early intervention. in terms of maybe say depression, there's some evidence to say that can develop for many people in adolescence, or you know, the experience of adverse childhood events can contribute to developing mental health problems. So, and I know the World Health Organization would say that, you know, mental health conditions affect 1 in 7 adolescents globally. I mean, that's huge, you know, so I guess there's early intervention is really key, but I suppose thinking we're recording this, aren't we, on budget day? So there's a real onus, I think, on government to adequately fund mental health services. You know, currently we've been at about 5 or 6% of the health budget instead of 12, or even even the NHS runs off at 11%, and that's still underfunded. So there's an importance for awareness around early intervention. The research says it's really effective, but there is a need for a kind of I guess the adequate funding to allow those services to exist. If you can work with someone in their teens around depression and give them a kind of ways to make sense of that experience, kind of things that they can do to make changes, you're going to see benefits of that into later years. So it's really central. Even just learning about kind of emotions, how to recognize the difference between anxiety or fear or sadness, knowing what bodily sensations go along with that, what thoughts, that's kind of we might call that affective awareness. That can lead into emotional regulation, which is a way of kind of coping with emotions, which we all need, which is a key part of mental health. If you can teach those sort of skills at an early age or to adolescents, they're going to be a key kind of building block of mental health into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think, you know, building those social and emotional skills in adolescence is hugely important. And I think even, you know, recently, many of you are probably aware, we had World Suicide Prevention Day early in September. And, you know, the statistics are really shocking. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death globally for that age group. So I think it's really fantastic to kind of hear you speaking about things that we could and should be doing. Finally, are there specific cultural or societal factors that may influence mental health at different life stages? And I suppose, more importantly, how can we ensure culturally competent mental health care going forward?
Yeah, there's certainly, I guess that's hugely relevant, isn't it? And so as I said, the kind of where people sit in society and the culture is very important. In Ireland, I think we've got a fair bit of work to be doing around understanding the needs of different minority groups. Certainly we know that, I guess, some recent studies show that minority ethnic groups were more frequently admitted to psychiatric services, but less likely to be offered kind of more routine primary or secondary care mental health services. So something's going on there, maybe, that we need to be aware of. So we think when we think about cultural competency, there's the systemic aspects of that. So how do we promote access to services? How are we making sure that people are having their needs met? So it's basically, that's kind of getting the people who need it in the door. So it's welcoming and it's aware enough to be able to do that. And then I suppose it's working with people in a way that makes sense of them as a whole being, a whole person, you know, and that's true for all of us. So it's really kind of looking at kind of respect for diverse cultures and beliefs, having specific communication and language supports if that's needed, family and advocate involvement and support, and ongoing kind of review and training. I think that a benefit to Ireland at the moment is we're growing and becoming more diverse, but within that we also have a responsibility to meet the mental health needs of everyone who's living here, you know, and making sure that, again, that idea that everybody has the right to good quality mental health care. That's really central, I think, today, World Mental Health Day. There's loads of things we can do as individuals, but as systems, I think we probably need to be doing a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. And you couldn't have led me better into our next panelist, Michael's topic, if you had tried. So thank you very much for that. And I'm sure we'll be coming back to you for some more conversation. Michael, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Michael is joining us from Kenya, so it leads nicely. And Michael is a human rights and inclusion expert. Michael, I wonder if you could start by maybe explaining to us kind of more broadly what is meant when we refer to the concept of inclusion. It's a buzzword that's been out there now for many years. And then maybe more specifically why it's so important in relation to global mental health.
Thank you very much, Ben. And once again, it's a pleasure to, be able to contribute and learn from this particular session. So, I mean, broadly, when we talk about inclusion within a human right-based framework, it mostly consists of two key elements. The first one is about the meaningful participation of all persons in all their diversity. And in this case, then, we could, for example, narrow it to persons with, psychosocial disabilities and lived experience. The second issue about inclusion is the issue of promoting and mainstreaming their human rights in all areas of their lives. So there are two components. There is the component of meaningful participation. There is the component of promoting and mainstreaming their human rights in all areas of, their lives, or in all areas of, for example, persons with lived experiences lives. So why I think this is important is, first of all, for example, persons with lived experiences and psychosocial disability, they are a very marginalized group, a group which is highly invisible even within the disability movement, leave alone the mainstream civil society actors. So for me, thinking about how we include persons with psychosocial disabilities through their representative organization is very, very critical as an underrepresented group within the disability movement. Secondly, we have to think about the stigma, the exclusion, the discrimination, the human rights violation that persons with psychosocial disabilities are subjected to. And this is a huge barrier towards their inclusion and participation in the society on an equal basis with others. So, and I mean, I was giving an example today in another session that even in simple events in the community, like attending a wedding, attending a funeral, persons with lived experiences and psychosocial disability will not be allowed by their families to do that. It's because an issue of stigma. They're not viewed as part of the society. They're not viewed as, as having personhood. So that for me is a big issue. Then how we start addressing stigma, discrimination, social exclusion, that's very, very important. The other thing is, of course, there's there's a paradigm shift in terms of the way we view development. And if you look at Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, the issue of men.
I think we might have lost Michael there.
Are inclusive of people with lived experiences. So that's where I think it's very, very important. My last point into that is that we really have to reflect back and think, what are the key foundation in terms of inclusion? What do we need to do to ensure the inclusion of people, for example, with psychosocial and lived experiences? And then I'm just going to mention, just quickly. And I think the first thing is the issue of non-discrimination. That is really, really critical toward ensuring the full and effective participation and inclusion. And this is for all persons, not only persons with psychosocial disability or lived experiences. And because one of the most challenge, for example, if you look at discrimination, is when laws says that certain groups of people cannot vote, they cannot inherit property, they cannot marry. So one core foundational pillar in terms of inclusion and ensuring the enjoyment of fundamental rights and freedom is basically about the concept of non-discrimination. The second concept, which is really important in the context of mental health, and this is something that we need to explore more, is the issue of reasonable accommodation. So across the board, whether it is in school or the workplace, we have to think about probably, and this is even something we've not completely figured out, what kind of accommodations, for example, do a person with a psychosocial disability requires in their workplace to be able to effectively participate and be productive within their workplace. So I think that for me is really important. And whereas reasonable accommodation or the kind of adjustments that people with psychosocial disability and lived experience might require for participation in different areas of life, it's not very clear. And I think that's something that we really need to work around with. So for example, talking about flexible working hours, people working on maybe on contracts, having regular breaks, those kind of accommodation to ensure that they're included in the workplace on an equal basis with others. We have to think about the extra cost of disability, especially for those people with psychosocial disability or lived experiences who identify as persons with disability. This person probably they have to get access to medication. They might require to have access to a psychologist, psychotherapy. So we have to think about that, because then that's really, really important as a precondition for inclusion. We have to think about what does it take for them to meaningfully participate and be engaged in their community. So what kind of support services do we need to invest in our communities? Is it peer support? Is it circles of friends? Is it family support? But again, just to emphasize that that kind of support must be delivered, of course, in a way that respects individual autonomy and personal dignity, and respecting the will and preference of a person. I think another important thing is participation and empowerment. We really have to empower organizations of persons with lived experiences in order for them to be able to advocate within a human rights-based approach, and also for them to be equipped to hold government into account when they're not fulfilling human rights obligation, either under national law or under international human rights law. We have to think about the issue of data, because normally we say what is not counted does not count. We have to think about the issue of inclusive budgeting. So we are talking about providing accommodations for people with lived experiences in the workplace. But then do we have, for example, an action plan within our organization for well-being and how we accommodate people with lived experience? And an action plan is not enough. Do we budget for that? Do we provide resources for the implementation of that? So I would just want to stop for there, just to highlight some few elements which I think are very critical in terms of foundations of inclusion. Thank you very much, Ben.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, it was really powerful, and I have to say, really, I hope it was informative for everybody. to really start thinking about what are some of the key challenges and what are some of the key considerations when it comes to inclusion and mental health. Maybe just adding to that, I wonder if you could just take us through kind of what are some of, I suppose, the key human rights considerations and the key instruments, human rights instruments in the context of human rights and mental health.
So I think in terms of the key instruments, of course, we have the WHO Quality Rights Initiative. And I think for me, that's really good because it sort of recognizes that, you know, the way the mental health system have been working, it's not good. So can we bring in a paradigm shift and sort of develop services which are recovery oriented and at the same time respects human rights? So that's one tool. I think at the core of everything in our work is, of course, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And I think WHO has really been working on this, even with the quality rights and then the new guidelines on, you know, mental health, human rights, and also in terms of how countries draft legislation. So that for me is also very critical. The Human Rights Council every year passes a resolution to the state parties in terms of promoting and advancing the human rights of persons with psychosocial disability and lived experience globally. We have to think about the WHO you know, action plan, which I think for me it's an important tool in terms of advancing inclusion and, you know, participation in terms of persons with psychosocial disabilities. I think one key document which is really important to mention is Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, we cannot address, for example, the issues of inequalities, poverty, if we do not get into the global development agenda. And that's something for me which is really important. So those would be some of you know, the key document which I could mention out, and also a bit of the work on the inter-agents standing committee. And why I think this is important is because, of course, in a lot of humanitarian context, most of the people will not look at the impact of this in situations of risk and humanitarian emergency. I mean, how does this affect people's mental health and well-being? So I think for me, the IASC guidelines are very important, and sort of creating an intersection in terms of how do we integrate especially mental health and psychosocial support, for example, in humanitarian programs. So that's very important. Just to sum up in terms of key consideration, which you mentioned, I think I will borrow heavily this from Article 3 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. I mean, it lays down very good, clear concept in terms of what should be the key consideration in terms of the human rights of people with disabilities. And just to read quickly through some of the important thing is, the first thing is respect for inherent dignity, which is really important. Respect for individual autonomy, including the freedom to make one's own choices and independence of person. The concept of non-discrimination, full and effective participation and inclusion, equality of opportunity, and equality between men and women. Because, I mean, historically, women face what we call multiple and intersectional discrimination in terms of their participation and inclusion, of course, in the society. So for me, in terms of consideration, I will actually go to Article 3 of the CRPD. And again, I think for me, the bottom line is CRPD compliance, and that's where gradually we see the global conversation shifting towards. How do we comply with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and other international human rights framework?
Yeah. Thanks very much, Michael. Just for everyone who's joined us today, just to recap, I think the key instruments or resources Michael were referring to were the CRPD, as he's just mentioned, especially Article 3, the WHO Quality Rights Initiative, and the WHO Mental Health Action Plan. But there's also some really good resources out there. I think even if people just Google kind of easy read for the CRPD, because otherwise it's quite a lengthy and legal document, but there's lots of explainers out there that you can also have a look at. Finally, Michael, I wonder, could you maybe share with us some examples of initiatives or work that has been done in maybe specifically in the Kenyan or African context, or even globally, that have really done a good job, I suppose, of promoting mental health, human rights, and inclusion?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. So just to mention a couple of things. First of all is peer support groups. And I think that for me really have been successful in Kenya, in Zimbabwe, and in other countries that we work with in Africa. I mean, because they provide an avenue, for example, for, strengthening the self-advocates of people with lived experiences. It sort of create a movement that can advocate for social justice within the field of mental health. And again, one of the key things within our peer support group, of course, is the element of livelihood, trying to address the intersection between poverty and, poverty and, for example, disability, so to speak. Because more than often when you speak to people in the field, they tell you they can't eat human rights. So, so some things you have to do, practical thing to improve their lives and build up their sustainable livelihoods. The second one is initiative around decriminalization of attempted suicide. So, and that's really important, of organizations coming together. So in Kenya, for example, we've challenged this in the High Court for, I think it's section 227 of the Penal Code to be declared unconstitutional. I think the other work which we've done, which is quite good, is in terms of strengthening organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities, because we realize most of them, they're very young, they're not well resourced, they don't have the technical capacity. So, we've been investing, we've been using the WHO Quality Right Initiative, and also we have a specific initiative which we are launching in November, where we've been strengthening organization of persons with psychosocial disability in Africa, and a lot of work around health system strengthening, especially in Nigeria and also in Burkina Faso, to ensure that mental health is integrated, of course, in the general health system. Key challenges, just to mention quickly, is, of course, the process of legislation on mental health is quite complex. So that's one of the difficulties that we find, trying to make it to be compliant with the convention and new guidelines from WHO, the Quality Rights Initiative. And of course, sometimes we encounter a lot of resistance, especially from medical professionals. Not that I have anything to do with medical professionals. This is the reality in the ground. So that's one thing. The other thing I really want to say is in Kenya and in many African countries, we are known for over legislative. Too many laws which are not being implemented. You know, you just want to pass laws, but there's lack of implementation in terms of those particular law. There's an issue of adequate budgetary allocation. I mean, it's one thing when, like, now we're having the World Mental Health Day as a universal human right, but I'm not hearing governments making serious commitments towards investing in community-based mental health services and support. You know, I mean, they're just talking about we need to sympathize and support and love, which is a good thing, but we need serious commitment from government in terms of improving the area of mental health. I think the last thing is just to talk about the biomedical approach. And sometimes we really don't look at, there are two issues here. When we adopt fundamentally a biomedical approach, then it sort of creates tension within the movement. That's one thing which happens. Then secondly, we fail to look at the social determinants of mental health, which for me are really critical. Yeah, I think I'll stop there because I've already spoken about the opportunities in terms of what opportunities exist from the CRPD, quality rights, and and all that. Yeah. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was really insightful. I think as well, just for any of our audience as well today, that just in case they have a more interest in some of what you were talking around kind of law and legislation and ensuring that they're human rights based. Yesterday, the WHO actually launched a guidance on legislation and human rights, specifically around mental health. So if you look that up, it's really informative and obviously very timely given the theme of this year's World Mental Health Day. And I think also on financing, again, I'm not sure kind of where our audience is coming from today, but if any of you are involved in advocacy and other areas like that, there's lots of really great information out there and data that you can use in your advocacy efforts around financing for mental health, in no matter what country you're in. Some really clear-cut data and statistics around kind of the return on investment in mental health, which, as we all know, is huge. Thank you, Michael. Again, I might come back to you if we have time at the end. Julianne, I wonder if, Michael actually was referring earlier to peer support as one of the key interventions that's being used globally at this stage, as you well know, coming from the Global Mental Health Peer Network. And I wonder maybe if firstly you could share kind of your personal journey and experiences with mental health and how it's shaped, I suppose, the work and you coming to work with the Global Mental Health Peer Network.
So I would have had experience, actually very little experience of mental health and what it would look like or what it would be like as a family member until I was 13, and I got catapulted into it following a depressive episode and numerous attempts of my brother trying to take his own life. And I happened to be the one that, well, theoretically saved him. So it led me down a path of kind of exposure to mental health hospitals and like my own very confusing feelings of panic attacks and low mood, followed by then my mother then having a depressive episode and a subsequent attempt on her life and with involuntary admissions. And so I had to figure out very, very quickly how to navigate both my own feelings and then the feelings and what was going on for my family. So my feelings kind of got put on the back burner. The focus was on my brother at the time, and then would have been on my mum to try and make sure that they were okay. I always kind of had a kind of a hangover, we'll say, of kind of life experience. So I'd be fine, keep people going, firefight, as we all know. And then a couple of years later, I'd then drop and everyone be like, what are you talking about? It's all fine. Like, we're all great now. And I'd be in a mess. So this kind of happened over the years. And then eventually time came that I was like, I need to actually look after my own mental health, because it was only when I really stopped and looked after myself and kind of got myself on a journey of recovery that I realized, wow, I actually was really functioning on a very empty, no gas left in the tank. The kind of early experiences of mental health from with my mom and my brother had led me to want to go into a field that would help other people. So I did not want other people to have to experience what I did. So both Susan and Michael have talked about in adolescence and the experience of how this can impact you going into adulthood, and being able to manage and understand emotions and feelings. Excuse me. So I wanted to be a psychologist. The points in were a bit high, so I decided, right, I'll do the next best thing, which was mental health nursing. I went and I finished my qualifications. I didn't think I had a chance of getting into child and adolescence, because at the time there wasn't a huge amount of services in Ireland, and I landed a job which was fantastic. And then so I worked for years in child and adolescence with mental health, and then it's really only been in the last couple of years that I started to acknowledge my own lived experience. I would have always kind of put it on the back burner, as I would have had to have done for years. And then so when I kind of started to begin to look after myself and acknowledge that, okay, I can look after other people's mental health, but I have it too. And so I then heard about the Global Mental Health Peer Network. They are about empowering voices, ensuring people's voices are heard. It was something, the values I really, really stood by. And I felt that maybe actually people might do benefit from hearing my experience, because I kind of have slightly different, well, not different, but like kind of an interesting experience, that I've got the carer's perspective, I've got my own perspective, and then I also kind of see the other side of being a professional in it. So that's led me to join and be a representative for Ireland. So
amazing. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, and for sharing your story. I wonder then, and again, you know, you'll have really seen this then across the board, as you said, both from kind of your clinical experience, your personal experience, and I suppose as a carer and a family member. What are kind of some of the common misconceptions or stigmas kind of surrounding mental health that individuals with lived experience face? And how do you think, maybe both in Ireland or in a global context, we could go around combating those stereotypes or stigmas?
Yeah, like in like I can kind of like really only speak for what I've experienced in Ireland. Like there's it is improving. Like people are talking more about their mental health. There are a lot, like people in primary schools are now learning about what their emotions are and how to talk about their feelings and how to be able to express negative, positive, any sort of emotions. But there really does still remain a huge stigma. I know like this month is for See Change, and a lot more people, you can see a lot more ribbons around. But like the there is a huge stigma around people sharing their story, like kind of feeling that raw exposure of feeling different. I know that our theme is it's a universal right for everyone to have mental health, but there is that, as Michael had mentioned, that invisible disability of, oh, well, you look fine, and sure, why would you want an extra break, or why do you need allowances? There's nothing wrong with you, kind of, oh, but you're not crying all the time, so what do you mean you're depressed? Or so I think there still is a huge level of education that's needed, increasing awareness of where other people are at. That I know we are becoming a lot more inclusive and diverse, but people are still kind of have their own opinion and kind of nearly societal view of what mental health should be. It's kind of like, well, it's not seen as a whole piece. It's seen as, oh, it's only mental health if there's something wrong. So it kind of, that spectrum, I think, needs to be thought a bit more. And I think that there's a huge piece of self-stigma as well, that people are, I can say that I definitely do. I've definitely done it in the past, and at times I still do. I don't share my experience with a lot of people. In these forums I do, but I feel that it's actually a very personal part of me, and a lot of people I've experienced in the past when I was trying to process and deal with things, that people didn't always like me to share all of my feelings. So it's something to for people to be aware that it's not everybody is going to give you the responses they want, and globally there's a huge level of work that needs to be done to really have consistency, so that if you go to a certain place, that everyone is going to be treated the exact same. Like, everyone is the exact same. We all are from different backgrounds, different cultures, different races, different genders, whatever that it might be, but we all deserve to be treated with the exact same level of respect, with engagement, whatever that it might be. And in order, your second part of your question, in order for that to happen, it's really how to reduce stigma and to reduce that level of and the word is after going in my head, but based discrimination or whatever that it might be, is about involving the people with lived experience, involving them at every level, at every stage in mental health. There's a huge focus on prevention. I've a huge passion about intervention and early prevention and early intervention, and it's really about getting the person at the center of care, the person at the center of initiatives. A lot more lived experiences becoming involved in developing frameworks and initiatives and different things. So it's about continuing to have the person's voice elevated, heard, listened to, understood.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah, all really good points. I really liked what you were saying around kind of the continuum as well, and how we need to start our conversations maybe need to be more about that than not just focused on, you know, one end of that continuum.
Yeah.
And especially I think as well, it's so important for people to remember about, you know, it's linked to what I think all three of you have spoken about today, but actually ensuring that, I suppose, people with lived experience have a seat at the table when it comes to decision making. Whether that's around their personal health care, or whether it's, you know, more to do with policy at a global or national level, frameworks that actually involve them.
And not to have a tokenistic, to actually not be a tick box, to actually have that everyone that they have the exact same seat on the table as everyone else.
So as Michael was referred to there as well, around kind of it being meaningful and authentic participation that's actually valued on an equal basis as others. Finally, Julianne, just in your role as chairperson for the EU region for the Global Mental Health Peer Network, what are some of the key initiatives that the network are working on? Whether they be to do with human rights or, obviously, they're all mental health specific. So what are some of the key pieces of work that the network is doing at the moment?
So the network at large is, there's 140 participants, and they cover 40 countries, and they're divided into specific regions, so covering the Americas, Asia, and Europe for where I am. So each of our regions are, we are tasked on developing outputs, and at the moment we are focusing on increasing, actually completing with our team, in ensuring lived experience is going to be heard, and our target for this term is in terms of recovery. So what we are doing is creating content in relation to what recovery looks like in the different areas in Europe. And so we're going to be sharing the stories of our Europe region members. We're going to be creating webinars, and we're going to also be creating content following that. And we have also just recently completed a youth mental health webinar, and we've also done a poster initiative. So we've reached out to all of our members across the entire network, and we've asked them to provide words of what you would tell your younger self. And we've created a beautiful poster illustration of that, so we can then share our lived experience, so that other young people maybe be able to get something from what we've all been around the block doing. And it's something that we published on Youth Mental Health Day, and we can also be continuing to be distributing along the way. And then, wow. So our board is doing phenomenal work. Our chairperson is always presenting all over the world, and they're doing the good fight. We'd often be feeding into different frameworks and providing lived experience feedback as well.
Yeah, wow, fantastic. Thank you very much, Julianne. I just wondered there, I know, Michael, we're definitely running out of time. I'll be dragged off here now in a second. But Michael, I think you perked up there when Julianne was talking about self-stigma. And if there's anything else specifically you wanted to maybe say about that. I know the director of the Irish Global Health Network has done a huge amount of work. I'm not sure if Nadine is on the call or not, but she's also a facilitator of the work of Byron Kate all around stigma and self-stigma. But yeah, if Michael, did you want to add anything on self-stigma before we wrap up?
Yeah, maybe just one quick comment. We can spare this discussion for another day. Yeah. My perception is always, so when you come from a very marginalized group, where you face a lot of discrimination, social exclusion, human rights violation, and all that, then I think for me the issue is not about, then I feel as if we are shifting the blame on the person due to systematic issues within the environment or the community. So actually we've been trying to unpack the whole issue of social stigma, self-stigma. Because where is this coming from? Because you have excluded me, you have discriminated me. So for me, I think it's more of trying to think, so where the issue is, and can we think a bit more differently about the issue of self-stigma? Where is it coming from? So that's a debate probably we are having internally, even in CBM. Because personally, from personal perspective, I disagree on that. You push people to the corner, you exclude them, you deny them their rights, then they sort of live in a cocoon, but then you want to say that they're the problem. They have stigma. instead of looking at what are the barriers within society, what is contributing to this. So just that, but it would be an interesting discussion to explore much
I was
later.
going, yeah, no, thank you very much. And I think absolutely we could spend a whole call discussing just this topic. And I think it's just, just a final note on it really for me is that I probably then sit somewhere in the middle where actually I see both perspectives. And maybe for me, it also comes down to language in that I completely agree with you, Michael, around what you're saying, but then that's not to say that there is not some form of internalized, and maybe stigma is the wrong word, experienced by people with lived experience as a result of what you were saying. Absolutely.
I'd agree.
Yeah. And maybe it's that we need to recoin it, or maybe it's that we need to acknowledge that there's two very separate pieces of work to be done. There's that for the individual who does have that self, whether it's stigma or something. And then there's that more systemic and societal, challenges that we have to address that are without a doubt leading to, both societal stigma and self-stigma, although I know you don't like the term. But yeah, it's a debate for another time. I'm so sorry we've ran out of time, everyone, but thank you very much to our panelists. It's been a really fruitful and insightful discussion. And I will hand you back over to Cara now for some final words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you to everybody who has spoken today. I think, as we discovered there, I think this was maybe the beginning of the conversation. There's definitely so much rich material that was discussed today and so broad ranging that we could have possibly kept going for an awful lot longer. So thank you so much to you all for participating, and thank you as well to everybody who has joined us here today. We appreciate all feedback so that we can continue to improve our events. That my colleagues have included a link in the chat for an evaluation form. If you wouldn't mind filling that out, we would appreciate that very much. I also just want to mention that you can become a member of IGHN today for all our news and developments and updates surrounding global health, and there'll also be a link in the chat for that. And finally, if you wish to share a recording of today's event or to look back at it once again, it will be available on the IGHN YouTube channels, our newsletter, and also on our website. So just once again, thank you so much to everybody involved today. I think this was a really, really worthwhile conversation, very, very insightful. I think just so broad ranging, but managing to include also that personal touch as well to make it really meaningful. So thank you to everybody involved.
Thank you, everyone. Happy World Mental Health Day.